it's not a path that I chose for myself. It's a path that really chose me. Looking back, I started working in the field when I was 19 years old. Fresh out of high school. I had my first child when I was 19, and I sound so old when I say this, but back in those days, pregnant girls didn't go to college. And so I went into the workforce, and my first full-time job was working with people with disabilities.
Wow.
And, I didn't go back to school until later in life. And I found kind of my home in the field of disabilities. I really found a place that I could make a difference, and I didn't need to have a pedigree to start off.
Welcome to the Defining Moments podcast, where leaders, innovators, and everyday heroes share the moments that changed everything. These are the stories behind resilience, purpose, and legacy. Now, let's dive into today's defining moment.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Defining Moments, the show where we uncover the decisions that change everything, not the safe choices, not the incremental improvements, but the moments that require you to outgrow who you've been and to become who you're meant to be. I'm Melanie Warner, the founder of Defining Moments Press. I'm the host of the Defining Moments podcast and TV show, where we chat with authors, experts, corporate leaders, high-level coaches, and people who are turning their expertise into best-selling books, premium brands, and powerful media platforms. This episode is brought to you by Defining Moments Press. We're a US-based publishing company, and we help authors around the world to write, publish, and promote a nonfiction book to elevate their expertise, their brand, and create a meaningful impact and create profit in 8 weeks or less. An example of how we did this with one of our clients is Rita Gladding. So this is Rita's book, Gavin Gone. Now, Rita lost her adult son, Gavin, to a hit and run. Someone who he was running, training for a marathon, and an impaired driver, a young teenage impaired driver, came along and hit Gavin and left him on the side of the road to die, which is horrible. And Rita discovered that there was a loophole in the California legislature where if you accidentally hit somebody and you leave the scene of the crime and you go sober up, then there was a loophole that was a lesser crime. So he lawyered up, came back, finally admitted what he had done, but had a lesser sentence. And so she realized this was something she needed to redo. So her whole book is really an advocacy for parents who are going through the grief of losing a child. But it almost reads as a how-to book on how to create a foundation, an organization of legacy, and how to get the law changed when something like that happens to someone you know or love. And she was just a mom living her life when all this thing happened. And that was definitely her defining moment. So we love to honor people that are sharing their stories in big ways and then seeing the action they take and turning that pain into purpose. So thank you so much for being here today. We appreciate it. And I want to shift to today's guest. I would love to introduce our beautiful, wonderful guest today, Bethany Toledo McCray. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Melanie.
Absolutely. Now, Bethany, she spent nearly 3 decades in the nonprofit sector, y'all, and is a nationally recognized leader in workforce development, advocacy, and leadership strategy. But what makes her perspective so powerful, and this is why I can't wait to talk to her today, is her ability to identify leverage, the decisions that create disproportionate impact, right? So when you're running a nonprofit or a charity, you still have to find a way to monetize your mission, just like Mother Teresa did. And recently, she had to make one of these big decisions herself, walking away from a very well-established brand to step into something bigger. So, Bethany, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Melanie. It's good to see you.
You too. No, we were just in Ohio last week. We were at an event called the Seven Figure Book Camp, where we were helping people write their books within a few days. And it was amazing to see you there working on your own personal project. So that was really fun. And really just getting to see people taking action on their dreams, right? A lot of people, they say they want to do something, but they don't follow through on it. And I know for you personally, you definitely had a big defining moment in your life. And this was something that happened back in 2024. So tell us a little bit more about what happened at that moment.
Yeah, so The nonprofit that I work with is called Lighthouse Cove. We are a community of practice for IDD professionals. Prior to 2026, we were known as the Ohio Alliance of Direct Support Professionals, and that was kind of condensed down into an acronym, OADSP. And if you, any industry that you're familiar with probably has their own form of alphabet soup. So it's a bunch of acronyms, and the name itself actually started to hold us back. We were formed to support direct support professionals. Those are frontline workers that support individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And what I learned throughout my career is that in order to support direct support professionals, we had to support frontline supervisors. And then in order to support frontline supervisors, we had to support the administrators and the leaders in the industry. And, it just was a big snowball effect. So we kept building programs to support the next layer of leadership. And then when we stepped back and took a look at what we had built, one, it was amazing. Two, it didn't match our name. We had actually outgrown our own brand. And so we spent a couple of years working on who we were. We talked to a lot of different stakeholders, and time again, people kept kind of giving us these visuals that we're kind of like a beacon. We are a safe place for people. There's maybe a shitstorm going on out there, but when they come to one of our events, one of our retreats, they feel like they're in a protected place where they can really learn, grow, and develop and get the tools they need to go back out into that storm. And that's how the name Lighthouse Cove came to be.
Wow. So you were working in this organization, Lighthouse Cove, and you said the name no longer really reflected the scope of your work, right? So what was the gap between who you were and how you were being perceived?
So our full name was the Ohio Alliance of Direct Support Professionals. So first and foremost, it pigeonholed us to Ohio. And I actually do a lot of traveling and a lot of consultation work outside of Ohio. We have people all over the country that utilize our programs. And so when I would travel and talk to people and tell them who we were, that would, just the word Ohio would kind of turn them off. Why do we want someone from Ohio coming in and supporting us? Our system looks different. And so that would confuse people. And then there was the fact that we had direct support professionals in our title as well. And that is one segment. And I will say probably the most important segment in our industry, that frontline workforce. But we have come to support everyone in the intellectual and developmental disability field. So it was really important for people to understand that. We actually had people coming to us and saying, hey, I think this leadership retreat sounds awesome, but my boss thinks it's only for DSPs. And so we would have to arm them with knowledge to go back and be able to speak to the program and how it would benefit them. And that's just one example of how our name was really holding us back.
And you say that it's specifically designed to help people with developmental disabilities, correct?
Yes.
And I was recently in Dubai, and I went to an event. I went to this place that was like this amusement park. And when I went in to actually pay for my ticket, they had this sign that said, it said people of determination. And there was a discount. And then it said companions of people with determination. And I asked them, I said, what does that mean? And they said, this is how we refer to people with disabilities in Dubai. And it became a collective spirit of people getting together and deciding we are not going to call them disabled people anymore. And I love that. And it's called People of Determination. As a city, they adopted it and everybody, agreed to it. And it's become like a formal process in their city. And I just felt so inspired by that when I came back. I thought that was the coolest thing. And have thought about that ever since, because I know so many people that have this label of disability, and yet I find that there are more of us that are more paralyzed, if you will, by fear than a disability per se. And so where are you finding in this space the biggest gaps, where people need the most support?
So, in terms of the people that need support, there are a variety. There's a whole spectrum. A lot of people are familiar with autism and the autism spectrum. There's really an entire spectrum of people with disabilities. There are people that need very little support, maybe some transportation support, some help with learning how to apply for a job and preparing for an interview. And then there are people on the other end of the spectrum that need support with every facet of their life, help with personal care, getting out into the community. So it's really a wide range, and there is a real skill set that is needed in order to support people and meet them where they are. And so that's what a lot of our programs do. Is it helps direct support professionals, frontline supervisors understand how to assess a situation and support someone in the way they need to be supported. In Ohio, a lot of times we refer to it as person-centered support. So it's not just, a one size fits all type of support and care. It's really based on what the person needs.
And you say that there's a certain belief that had to go away, right, in this process, that staying narrowly defined, it protects credibility, but it also could affect, I'm assuming, funding, partnerships. Now you're shifting this name, this brand, this identity. So there was kind of a risk in doing that. But why do you feel like so many people just stay where they are because it's comfortable versus making a big uncomfortable change like this?
I think fear holds people back, and fear of the unknown, fear of how people are going to take what they're doing. A lot of times when people don't understand what's happening, then they if we were to just change our name and we didn't spend time talking about it and really preparing people, we essentially spent the entire year of 2025 preparing people for our name change, and making sure that we were clear that our mission hasn't changed. Our mission is to educate, elevate, and empower IDD professionals. What we did was broaden our focus. Before, our mission said we educate, elevate, and empower direct support professionals. So it was really important to us that people understood our mission wasn't changing. It was just getting bigger, and it was more inclusive.
So if somebody's watching this and they're a leader in an organization and they know that something isn't working, what would you identify as the first step that they could do to take advantage of their highest leverage opportunity right now?
So I would actually flip it and I would say, look at what is working. When we talk about leverage is a mental model. So when you talk about the mental model of leverage, you look at programs and support where you get an outsized impact from the resources that you put into it. Sometimes I like to say, look at your programs that kind of punch above their weight class. So for us, that meant looking at we're a nonprofit. So we have a lot of programs that, are no profit. But we also have some programs and support that help fund and support those other programs that are needed and necessary, but the funding's just not there. So rather than looking at all of those holes and gaps, I encourage people to look at their programs that really are, that they really have the ability to leverage things that are going well and figure out how they can even better leverage those.
So you said that you partner with multiple people. What's that process look like as a nonprofit when you decide to work with somebody else and either endorse what they're doing? Because I find a lot of nonprofits, there are thousands of them, and a lot of them are doing the same things, but they're not collaborating. So how do you decide who to collaborate with, and what are those qualities that you look for?
So, my organization is very unique. We're the only organization that does what we do here in Ohio and also really across the country. And so I have a unique perspective where I get to kind of be Switzerland in a way and take a look at, all of the other nonprofits in our sector and help them see where their leverage points are and maybe where organization A over here is really good at this, but not so good at that. Look at organization B and see like what they're really good at, what they're not, and help bring them together so they can learn from one another. And I think that, as humans, we tend to want to be protective of what we have. But it really isn't until we get over that fear and that need that we think we have to protect what we have and open ourselves up that we can really learn and grow and support one another.
So when you first started working out in this space and you were kind of new to the industry, Was there a time where you hit a wall or the wheels fell off or you started thinking, I don't know if I'm meant for this? Like, can you share a moment where you felt like just you failed miserably? Maybe it was an event that you planned and no one showed up, or you had a fundraising goal that didn't work out, right? Like, can you give us an example of something that didn't go as planned? And then how were you able to take that and turn it into something that served your community?
Yes, absolutely. So, looking back, I feel that, we vet programs and we vet ourselves through filters, and we always have people's best interest at heart. And that's not to say, though, that we shouldn't reevaluate programs and strategy moving forward. So I would say about 10 or 12 years ago, we partnered with an organization in Ohio to create a DSP high school program. So that's a program to help train high school students to be direct support professionals and work with people with disabilities. And again, we were doing this for all of the right reasons. We focused on at-risk youth for this program. So, we're doing that, and we came up with a name for the program that we thought was really cool. It was the Community Connections Career Partnership of Ohio. And don't tell Disney, but we called it C3PO for short. And so people either loved the name or they hated the name. But the fact of the matter was, the name didn't do anything to help people understand what the program was and who it was for. Mm-hmm. And so over the course of about 5 or 6 years, we developed this program, put a lot of energy and effort into it. And it wasn't as successful as we had hoped. And when we really stepped back and we took a look at it, we're like, well, one, a lot of people have no idea what we're doing just because we have a weird name for the program. And two, we're focusing on at-risk youth. And so we have people with disabilities who are a lot of times segregated, even in schools where they're integrated. There's still a special classroom, a special place, for them to be within that school system. So then you have a group of students that are in a certain program because they're struggling in school, working with kind of a segregated group of people. And it just didn't produce the results that we thought that it would. Great program, really some great stories that came out of it. But what we realized is a program like this should be open to everyone. So we actually rebranded that program, and now it's called DSPU. And so by the name itself, that inspires the question, well, what is DSPU? What is a DSP? And it gives us that opportunity to explain it. In the past, as C3PO, or the Community Connections Career Partnership, it would just get dismissed. People weren't even curious about what that meant. And now the program's open to anyone. We want future doctors and lawyers and nurses, everyone to be curious about the program, and to be able to participate in it, because it doesn't matter what you do in your life. Knowing and understanding the people in your community is key.
Absolutely. I love that idea. I've always believed, I know when my son was younger and learning how to read, when I finally realized with my own kids, the only reason they knew how to read is because they had reading buddies. It wasn't that the teachers were sitting down with them anymore and actually teaching them one-on-one how to read, or even in front of the group. So the accountability partner was another kid from the school that may be a few years older than them. And it was such a great model because there were, more kids than teachers, and these young kids felt empowered to know that they could actually help somebody else learn how to read. And it just became this really cool little bonding experience. And so I know that that was a whole program that was set up as a nonprofit in our community. It worked really well. Where do you see nonprofit leaders staying stuck longer than they should?
Oh, goodness. That's a really, really good question. I think that nonprofit leaders can get kind of stuck like a deer in the headlights, especially when it comes to funding and having that fear. And let's just even back up a little bit more with like budgets and how you can even fund a nonprofit. I say that our budget's like a patchwork quilt, and it's a different quilt every single year because you really have to piece it together. And you there is no such thing as guaranteed funding in the nonprofit world. So I think a lot of times people get stuck in this, well, this is working right now and we have funding for this right now, and it's scary to kind of grow and to break out and go this way when we don't know that there's going to be funding for that.
Yeah, I think a lot of nonprofits are relying on grants or government assistance, and I know like PBS, we work with, PBS and a lot of their independent affiliates are owned as, public television and they lost a lot of funding and they had to reinvent themselves. So everybody had to kind of get creative with the financing in that space, even with something that big on a national scale. How did that affect the loss of funding and a lot of the pullback on grants? Did it force you to have to find more donors or get more creative in finding those resources? How did that affect you guys?
So it really helped the leaders in my industry come together and really examine, what the future will look like if funding really stays tight the way it is now. There are a lot of large programs that are not being funded. So it really has forced us to think strategically. But again, it has brought us all together because we're really looking at it. I'm a part of a federal work group now that's looking at, funding and supporting these nonprofits from a different lens, and that's where kind of the conversation comes in that we really have to act as entrepreneurs. We have to hustle, and that's what has become clear to me over the last couple of months is that it's a hustle. You have to figure out how to make it work regardless. You have employees relying on you, you have the people that your mission supports relying on you. So we have to figure out how to exist isn't the right word, how to sustain and thrive in an ecosystem that is ever changing.
What would you say is the biggest challenge facing nonprofits today?
I would say that probably the funding is the biggest challenge. Well, I think that nonprofits would probably say that's their biggest challenge. I think that potentially, if you look under the hood, it might be a little different. The diagnosis might be more along the lines of, we have to look at the culture of nonprofits and really look at how we're investing in people. A lot of nonprofits were started, they were founded by someone that had a mission. And then, they grow that nonprofit to a certain point and then they want to retire. They want their day-to-day life to look a little different. And they look around and they haven't done succession planning. So there's really not anyone ready to step into that role. And so I think that, really people need to think about what they want their nonprofit to look like in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the road. What does it look like when that leader isn't in that seat anymore?
So, what's the biggest inefficiency in the nonprofit ecosystem that nobody's talking about?
There are so many different types of nonprofit. So I would say that that's definitely not a one size fits all answer. There are, I don't know, that's a tough question.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine, for example, with AI, if a lot of nonprofits are relying on volunteers, for example, then I would think the challenge would be finding the right people. And I remember Mother Teresa is the one who said, you can fire a volunteer. And here's a woman who is a saint, right? And she said, if you hire somebody and they don't have absolute joy for what they're doing after 90 days, cut them loose, right? So she actually was responsible for creating that 90-day policy in a lot of corporate America. So it's funny to see how somebody who created a nonprofit from very little, built it like a business. And I find a lot of the nonprofits, if they ran more like a business, if they were more efficient in their process, their systems, their people, if there's more reliability, they function better. But a lot of times they're relying just on volunteers. And so then there's no consistency. You got to train new people every day. You have to have systems because you've got people coming in all the time and they're learning a new system. You don't have the same people every day doing things. So I would think that that would be a big inefficiency that maybe people aren't talking about. I'm just assuming, depending on how funded they are.
And I think you're absolutely right. And honestly, regardless of whether it's a volunteer or whether it's a paid position, having knowledge only existing within one person's mind is always dangerous when it comes to the nonprofit world. Because if, Sarah, has to leave. She moves because her husband gets stationed somewhere else. And Sarah has all of this knowledge, like that institutional knowledge needs to be captured somewhere. And I think that nonprofits could definitely do a better job, myself included, making sure that we have desk manuals that operationalize the work that we do. And AI is a great, tool to use to create those desk manuals.
So you have SOPs and KPIs like anybody else, just like a corporation would, I would assume. Like you have an
Absolutely.
event, you got to sell this many tickets. You've got to hold people accountable for reaching out and, making phone calls and, and leveraging. And I would say, if you're do you guys do a lot of fundraising events?
We do an annual booster campaign, and we usually run that campaign 6 to 8 months out of the year. And that is, if you think of even like a school booster campaign, it's an effort to help support, like to create this underpinning of support for all of the work that we do, because there's just not enough money in the grants.
Yeah, and I find that one of the biggest mistakes that I see a lot of nonprofits make is they focus so much effort on one big event a year. Not that you guys are doing this, but just from what I see, is I have a lot of clients that are in that space, and they focus so much effort and energy on one event, and then all the money goes into catering and the location and all that, and then there's not a lot of fundraising left over. So it's coming up with that strategy of finding people that want to support on a regular basis because their bills aren't paid once a year. They have monthly costs. So I would think the holy grail in the fundraising space or the nonprofit space is finding those supporters that align with the mission that want to continuously donate time, talent, or treasure, right? That kind of the goal for everybody. If you're relying on, donors as opposed to funding like grants, which are now not as prevalent as they used to be. So I would think that, finding donors that align with the message that can give ongoing support would be a goal for some people. Is that something that you guys are focused on, or how can people support your mission?
Yeah, so we focus on programs and services. And, so that's a little bit different. We do some fundraising, so we can offer events at, very low cost or even free for the people that we support. But what has really kept us sustainable throughout, I think we were founded in 2003. So what has kept us sustainable is having programs and support that we can provide to other people. And so I think that organizations, when they're looking for those leverage points, what is it that they can do that maybe someone else can't? And I'll go back to that hustle word. I'm actually writing a book called The Nonprofit Hustle, which you know that very well.
Yay!
And yeah. So, and it's based on what I've learned over these 30 years. And so some of the things that we do, like to help that put together that patchwork quilt of our budget is I support other events. So there is a conference every fall, and we have about 1,000 people that attend that conference. I partner with 3 other nonprofit organizations. And one of the things that my organization does for this big conference is we manage the funds. We help vet, speakers, and we pay the bills for it. And so we're leveraging, some of this knowledge and ability that we have to make that conference successful.
See, I think that's really smart to do strategic partnerships, collaborations, because I do find that there are so many nonprofits that are struggling out there to exist, and they're all doing great things, but they don't know about each other. Like there isn't really some central database, like a phone book that you would find of like communities. And I find that's a big challenge is people don't know about the options they have. There's nothing really tying them all together to where they can create that kind of alignment and partnership. So how do you find the companies that you work with either as vendors or as partners?
So you take a look at the people that look at your mission, look at the people, the end result, the people that you're supporting. We're supporting people with disabilities at the end of the day. We're doing that by educating, elevating, and empower the people that actually provide that support to them. So we look at what they need. And there are associations for just about every industry, whether it's a for-profit or a nonprofit, company or organization that we're talking about. So looking for an association and, so that's like a trade organization that really helps represent whatever sector you're in, and going to their conferences and networking with those people and seeing who the other vendors are and figuring out if there's ways you can partner and work together.
I love that. I think that's the key. And I know that there's so many people out there who talk about they want to start a nonprofit, right? It's a dream of theirs. And I also talk to a lot of entrepreneurs and they ask me, I want to do this, but should I start it as a for-profit or a nonprofit? And I always joke and say a lot of entrepreneurs are not nonprofit on purpose, but I always recommend that people start their business for profit first and then create the nonprofit because it becomes an alignment between the two companies. And as you're making more money in your for-profit business, now you can naturally help fund your nonprofit, whereas the other way around, you're building a nonprofit, you still need to find funding and donations and everything. And it seems to be a harder lift to get those funded than a traditional business. And maybe I'm assuming, but I'm understanding a little bit more about that marketplace and the people that want to do either or both, or there's people who come from the nonprofit space that decide they want to launch a business. So it's a very different dynamic. What advice would you give to somebody who is thinking about starting their own nonprofit?
I would say that they need to do a lot of homework. Learn if there are nonprofit organizations out there that are already doing and filling a space that they're looking to fill. And what does that mean for them? Do they see gaps in those other nonprofits that they might be able to fill? Some nonprofits have more work than they can do, and they would welcome a partnership, and they would maybe welcome the opportunity to mentor someone. So I would say, for someone looking to start a nonprofit, to find a mentor in that space and to try to learn from them, pick their brain, find out what the pain points are and what obstacles they might have to overcome. And then one part, of the kind of the whole ecosystem that can get ignored sometimes is the whole, all states have a governor. There is a funding mechanism for the states. And, states fund different things. They fund services for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And so looking into what the political side of that, the political climate and just what, how that relates to what they want to do. I encourage a lot of people that are in the nonprofit space to get into political advocacy, because if they can find some champions, that have the governor's ear or, know people that know people, they might be able to, maybe they have a great idea for a school-aged program, and they might be able to get funding through their state rather than trying to raise all of those funds.
That makes sense. So if somebody's an entrepreneur and they already have a business in some of these sectors, what's the best way for them to plug in to support nonprofits or become a provider or a vendor?
So I would say networking. Find out, look within. What are you passionate about? And, are you passionate about helping kids? Are you passionate about helping adults with disabilities? What inspires you? And then look for a nonprofit that aligns with those values and talk to them. I will talk to anyone who's looking for, a way to get involved with either my organization or another type of organization in our industry, and find out time, talent, resources, what could they use? And I think that's another thing that, nonprofits don't do enough of, and that's looking at how they can add value to other nonprofits. Like what's some reciprocity that could really be good for nonprofits? There are things that, that nonprofits are good at. There are things that they're not so good at. So look for those matches.
I think that makes sense because there's so many people out there that already have solutions. So you almost don't have to create from scratch. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. But it's just like I find that even in our own community here in California, there are thousands of nonprofits in our community. And I found that there really isn't a lack of resources. There's just a lack of awareness. Like people just don't know that these corporations exist, or these companies, or these service vendors, or even the nonprofits themselves. And so I think definitely getting plugged in and aligning yourself, if you're new, to somebody that has a similar goal. Maybe it's not a competitive, but it's a cooperative space. And then it's like you get a chance to grow together, right? To get to know your community and like you said, network and meet other people that could potentially help you build it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's a huge effort. And I commend you for all that you're doing. I know it's not easy, because there's other factors, that are always in play in politics and, um, restrictions in the industry and how you spend money and how you make decisions and where things have to go. Like it just is a lot to manage. So, I'm glad that you're somebody that enjoys being in that space. You know what I mean? It's a whole different world for me. Like I volunteer, I've always donated time, talent, and treasure to my church or other nonprofits as well. So I can see where people struggle to find good people to help support the vision. So I think this company is very blessed to have you. I can tell how passionate you are and how committed you are. So congratulations on everything you're doing, all of your success.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I love it. And it's not a path that I chose for myself. It's a path that really chose me. Looking back, I started working in the field when I was 19 years old. Fresh out of high school. I had my first child when I was 19, and I sound so old when I say this, but back in those days, pregnant girls didn't go to college. And so I went into the workforce, and my first full-time job was working with people with disabilities.
Wow.
And I didn't go back to school until later in life. And I found kind of my home in the field of disabilities. I really found a place that I could make a difference, and I didn't need to have a pedigree to start off. And I've had different experiences throughout my career that really have landed me here in this seat today, talking with you.
Mhm.
Um, when I kind of outgrew my role as a direct support professional, and I became the program director for a small organization, and then I got involved with volunteering. So just like you're saying, you volunteer. Sometimes when you volunteer for things, it sucks you in. So I got sucked into the Ohio Alliance of Direct Support Professionals because I loved what they were about. I wished I had the resources that they were offering when I was doing that frontline work. So I just became really passionate about arming people with the knowledge that I wish I would have had, which led me to, creating conferences and leadership retreats and events to support people that do the work. And it was actually during one of those events, we had a speaker named Rachel Simon. She's a New York Times bestselling author. She authored the book Riding the Bus with My Sister and the Story of Beautiful Girl. And I was so excited to get to meet her and know she was going to be at an event we were hosting. I was like fangirling her before that was even, a popular phrase. And I actually got to sit and work with her and help her as she was signing autographs for her newest book that had just come out. And through a conversation, she was just like, wow, I can tell you're really passionate. She's like, I would love to learn more about your work. Do you want to like maybe have some tea this afternoon after we're done with this event? And I'm like, oh, holy cow. Like to me, this is a famous
Yeah.
person asking to
Yeah.
have tea with me. And so we go back, I take her back to the hotel and we sit in the little hotel restaurant and we have some tea. And she asks me about me, not necessarily about my job and what I'm doing, but just about me. And through that conversation, I shared that, when I was in high school, my dad lost his eyesight and, just different things, about that. And she was like, oh, so you were a direct support professional and taking care of people before you were ever doing it for a paycheck. And I was like, whoa, I had never thought of it that way before.
Mhm.
And so the conversation got a little deeper and she looked at me and she's like, you are a rare bird. You think differently and I'm young, I'm like, oh, thank you. And the next week, the executive director of the organization said, hey, how did it go when you took Rachel back to her hotel room? And I was like, oh, we had a great conversation. I was like, she called me a rare bird. And Amy, the executive director at the time, said, yeah, I think she's right. And she said, I think I want to talk to you about your future with the organization. And the next week, I had a meeting with the board president and with Amy, and they said, we want you to be the next executive director. And
Wow.
that completely changed the trajectory of my life, completely and totally.
That's amazing. And all from that book. I love
Yes.
that the book inspired you and you got a chance to meet the author. And now her book, just to be clear, was about her sister had disability, or
Yes.
is
Yes.
so it was about her experience of having a sister that had a disability. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. So Rachel has a sister that has disabilities, and she simply asked Rachel, her sister, if she would ride the bus with her. And so it is a story. It was actually turned into, I believe it's a Lifetime movie starring Rosie O'Donnell called Riding the Bus with My Sister. And as Rachel rode the bus with her sister, she saw this entire community that her sister had built. And it just really struck her and inspired her to write that book.
I love that. That is so cool. And I love seeing books inspire people because I'm such a book nerd myself. In fact, I thought it was interesting. Last week when we were at our book camp, we had a speaker that came in and he spoke about how he's a financial advisor and he spoke about how he wrote this book and he grew his business from 3 million to 20 million in annuities using this book and this simple book funnel. And the whole time he spoke, he was there virtually, if you remember Gary.
Yes, yeah.
Uh, and no one knew that he was legally blind, that he's visually impaired. And I just am so inspired by stories of people, even people with sight lack vision sometimes, and they can hold themselves back. So I was just really impressed with the fact that he figured out, he was able to write a book, build a book funnel, grow his business, doing like 100 podcasts. He sold thousands of books without ever having to leave his house. And he figured out a way to do it and monetize his knowledge. And I thought that was really cool. So I love seeing other people that can create platforms and opportunities for people like that who may not have otherwise had a chance to do that. And I think that is so fun. I love it. So, what does the future of nonprofit leadership look like if leaders actually embrace leverage?
I think that leaders can find stability if they look at what their leverage points are and really focus on what's working. And I'm not saying ignore problems, don't try to fix things at all. But when you look at an organization as a whole, as humans, we tend to want to just fix everything right now. So we really have to be more strategic and we have to know what do we want our organization to look like in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and then kind of reverse engineer that.
So, you said that people always ask, what are you doing, but not where are you going? So, let's ask that, Bethany, where are you going?
So Lighthouse Cove is going places. And, we changed our name so that we wouldn't be pigeonholed to Ohio into one small sector of the nonprofit, space that we are in. So we want to go all over the United States. We want to help people with their workforce challenges. In the field of IDD, there have been workforce challenges long before, COVID and everyone started having trouble hiring. And so we want to help with those things. We have our high school program that is a real pipeline into the field. But another thing, we're like, we have this great program, but people get to high school and they have no idea what it is to be a DSP. They never heard of it before. So we actually just launched a program called Growing Together. And it is a program where we have created a cast of characters that have different types of disabilities, and they meet students in second grade. And these characters are in second grade, and they grow with the students from second grade all the way through eighth grade. And by the time the students are in eighth grade, they know what a direct support professional is. They know that there are career opportunities. We have nurses in our industry, we have doctors, we have a lot of roles, accounting, finance, all of it. And they also know about programs like Best Buddies and Special Olympics. And just in general, they build empathy through the program and learn that, we all have different abilities.
So, does your program have something that can help people? Like, for example, if there's a teacher that wants to learn how to work with a neurodivergent child in their class, do you do training for professionals and other people and leaders who want to learn how to work with people that have disabilities?
So we actually have an online learning management system, and there's a variety of courses available there. We also have licensing programs for our curriculum, and it can be used in like the paraprofessional space. I know that that's a big need right now to hire people that maybe they didn't go to school and get a degree to be a teacher, but maybe they have a degree or they have some college courses under their belt, and they're very well suited to be a paraprofessional. And that's someone that works alongside of a teacher, but might work specifically with one or two students at a time that are neurodivergent.
I think that is so cool. That would be so fun because I know so many people that are struggling as teachers that they don't understand how to work with kids that have an IEP. You know what I mean? And there's more and more kids that are coming into these programs that have special needs, and in whether it's visual processing issues, whether it's, neurodivergent, like, from autism or spectrum disorders, all the way to personality disorders, mental health issues. Like it's becoming like it used to be a minority of people that had issues in schools, and now it's becoming a lot more people. And so the teachers don't know in that space what to do or how to support the children. Even the counselors don't always know. So I would think if you partner with the schools that, that there would be alignment there and budgets there in the schools to help with that, to help the students and the teachers be able to create that support for each other better. So yeah, that's an interesting concept. So as you think about where you're headed, where the company is headed, all the different opportunities that are being created with this new rebrand, are you focusing more on national things? Do you also do stuff outside of the US?
So we haven't been outside of the US. That would be a great opportunity. I do have some colleagues that have just done some studies outside of the US to really see what other systems look like. And that's something that I would love to do in the future. We've got a very good team here in Ohio that can kind of keep the day-to-day running because we have a lot of programs here in Ohio. And I have the ability to focus my time, to go out and meet with other state leaders and look at other state departments of developmental disabilities and, look at their systems and how we can move them forward.
I think it's really interesting that you grew up as a teenager, and you said your dad lost his sight
Yes.
when you were in high school.
Mhm.
And I have found almost every time I see people that are plugged into a specific nonprofit, sometimes it seems like high percentage, there's always a personal story there, something that drives that person to be in that space, whether, they have a relative that passed away of cancer or was sick. I know people that became doctors because there was somebody in their family that had a disease that they couldn't find the solution to, so many different people that have a personal influence to go into that field. So I think it's interesting that, that you were inspired by these events, and then here you are being this voice and this support for so many people that wouldn't be able to have. I think about where would people be if this program didn't exist. So thank you for what you do, for the servant leadership that you do for so many people. And I know it's an unsung hero because there's a lot of people that probably don't get credit for the work they do behind the scenes for all of these people. So thank you for that.
Thank
Uh,
you.
is there anything else you want to add for our audience today?
Oh goodness. I would say for any nonprofit leader out there listening or watching, just know that you are not alone. A lot of times people, we've all heard like it's lonely at the top, and it's only lonely at the top if you let it be. Find your people, find your tribe, and work together. And, really you can make so much more progress working with other people than just trying to stay off to yourself, and make a difference, based on just what your mission is.
Well, I love that. And I appreciate everything that you're doing for people. So thank you, Bethany, for being here.
Thank you
Um,
for having me.
so I have just a lightning round of a couple of questions as
Oh,
we kind
goodness.
of wrap up. And then I have our mystery guest coming up. So don't go anywhere, folks.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So what would you say? What's one decision that a leader knows they need to make but keeps putting it off?
Hmm. Um, having a tough conversation with the team member that's not performing or someone that's not living up to their potential or expectations. A lot of times, the nonprofit world or just business in general, people tend to avoid having those tough conversations.
And if someone feels like their organization has outgrown its identity, whether they're for profit or nonprofit, what's the first step to realigning it?
Oh, talk to people. Ask people what thoughts and feelings do they have when they think of your organization? Say the organization's name and have them, tell you like how do they think of you as an organization and see if that lines up. And really look at your organization or your company as an outsider.
That is good advice. Thank you very much. I appreciate you being here. And what I want to do for a second is jump into our one of my favorite parts of our show where we get to talk about a mystery guest. Now we're going to share a story with somebody and you guys can try to guess who it is that we're talking about. And you may know. So Bethany, if you know, don't blow it. I'm just kidding. You probably know the person here, but I'm curious if we all hear about the success, right? But we rarely ever hear how things got started. And so this particular woman, um, she made a promise, and not to investors, not to a board, not to a strategy, but to her sister. Her sister was dying of breast cancer. And in her final days, she asked her to do something simple but impossible. She said, "Promise me you'll do everything you can to end this disease." And at that time, there was no playbook for what that meant. And then her sister passed away, and the woman took another year of mourning. She took another year of mourning to really honor her sister before she took action. And boy, did she. And at the time, there was no like organization that did cancer research or any of these things. Breast cancer wasn't openly talked about. It was kind of a woman's disease, and anything to do with lady parts, nobody talked about, right? Funding was limited, awareness was almost non-existent. And this woman, she wasn't stepping into a system ready for scale. She was stepping into a space that didn't even fully exist yet. So she started small, grassroots. She did local events. She started having conversations that were uncomfortable but necessary. And for years, it didn't really go anywhere. It didn't feel like a global movement. It looked like persistence. It looked like knocking on doors, raising a little bit of money here, small amounts of money there, trying to get people to care about something they didn't even understand. But her defining moment wasn't just the promise she made to her dying sister. It was what came after, because she had a choice. I can either build something small that's manageable and familiar, or I can build something that has such a vision bold enough to match the promise that she actually made. And that required her to think differently, not just as an advocate, but as a builder of a movement. And she introduced something simple but powerful: the pink ribbon, a symbol that people could rally around, a way to take something complex and make it visible, shareable, and scalable that really showed the community and everybody in the neighborhood that there was a woman on the block that was struggling with cancer. And it was this pink ribbon that was this silent message that was such a small thing, but said so much. And I'm getting goosebumps. And that's when everything shifted, because she stopped trying to grow awareness one conversation at a time. And she created a movement that people could belong to. And that is the defining moment of Nancy Brinker, behind the movement that became the Susan G. Komen Foundation, a global force that has raised billions of dollars for cancer research, that has changed cancer forever and brought a once silent disease into the public conversation. Because sometimes impact doesn't come from doing more. It comes from finding the one lever that changes everything. And I can honestly say there are people in my life that are alive today because of Susan G. Komen and Nancy Brinker. So I thank Nancy and Susan, and I honor Susan and thank Nancy for her dedication, because there are so many millions of people whose wives, mothers, sisters, and daughters are alive today, that when we get those diagnoses, the C word diagnosis of cancer that used to be an absolute death sentence, because of the determination and passion and purpose behind women like Susan G. Komen and Nancy Brinker, who made the commitment to her sister. This is what makes the difference. And this is where one woman or one person can make a huge difference. So Bethany, I want to thank you for the difference that you're making to people with disabilities. silently, privately, and out there in the public when you do all these events and help raise money for your organization. This is what's so powerful about this story, that she didn't just work harder to solve the problem. She found a way to scale the impact. And when you think about your own work, Bethany, and how much about leadership is doing more, and how much of it is about identifying that one lever that changes everything. So I want to thank you so much for being here today, for sharing your inspiring story, for sharing your defining moment with us. And all of you that are watching and listening, thank you for being here. If you haven't done it, please take a second and subscribe so we can continue to bring these kind of interviews that are insightful and inspiring. I hope that you guys have been entertained and inspired today, and we appreciate you so much, and we'll see you next time. All right, take care, everyone. Bye. Thank you, Bethany.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Defining Moments podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.